It is exactly 9:39 a.m. News and views right here on Salam Media with me, Julie Alli. I did indicate that we're talking to three dynamic women on the show, the second half of the show. We've just done talking with the amazing the amazing lady from Sanzaf, and that, of course, was Fairuz Mohammed. We are now going to cross over and talk with Dr. Lubna Nadvi. She is she is an academic. Why am I tripping over my tongue today? She is an academic and community activist based in KZN. She's taken a bit of time out from the presidential summit on GBV and femicide to tell us just what is going down at the summit. We know it was quite a heated day yesterday. People were very vociferous about their stance on GBV and femicide. I'm not sure how the president felt about it, probably moments of discomfort, but we do need to turn up the heat on these matters. For too long, women have been subjugated and subjected to gender-based violence. It's about time we stood up and said enough is enough. Dr. Lubna Nadvi, a very good morning to you. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program.
Ji, wa alaikum salam, and thank you very much for having me on.
Lovely to have you. Can you tell us what has transpired since yesterday? I know the women are really very fired up, and rightly so. There just is not enough political will as far as this issue is concerned. And women have now come together and are demanding for their issues on GBV and femicide to be heard, and for measures to be put in place for us to be protected.
So basically, I mean, there are, of course, both men and women at this conference who are, really upset about the situation. One of the main issues that has emerged is the question that the council, the GBVF council, which was supposed to have been set up a while ago, has not yet been set up. And that is the structure that is meant to implement the NSP, or the National Strategic Plan. So a lot of the questions that were being asked at yesterday's session, particularly of the president and the ministers, were around why that council has not been set up, and why other strategies and structures that should have been put into place have not actually happened so far. And one needs to remember that, the first summit happened quite a few years ago, the first presidential summit on GBVF, and there had been a lot of promises made about what was going to happen. So, obviously in this time, 4 years, since the first march actually that we had as women around the country, there have been hundreds of women, young girls who have been killed and lost their lives. So
Absolutely.
the anger is very real, and people in yesterday's session were refusing to, be silenced, and they insisted on being heard. And so the president, to his credit, and, the organizers allowed them to speak. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of raw pain, and both men and women spoke, because, we have to understand that men are also part of the kind of solution to the issue. So it's been a very intense session from yesterday. Another question that was raised was about funding. How is funding being sort of allocated? What has happened to funding that was promised? So these are some of the questions that have emerged around the summit from yesterday.
So is today going to be almost a continuation of yesterday, wanting answers, wanting commitment, wanting budget to put, to put the structures in place to assist women? I'm kind of also wondering, Dr. Lubna, regarding the issue. I mean, 90% we know that men are also subject to issues around gender-based violence. It doesn't necessarily only talk to women. Some men are also in very, very violent and abusive relationships. But by and large, it it is the men who are the perpetrators. And some of the issues around that is obviously low self-esteem, broken men for whatever reason, alcohol and drug abuse, etc., etc., etc. Those are issues that also need to be addressed. And we need to have facilities in place for the men to be treated, men and boys to be treated when they have these sort of um, diseases. Because if they, you can't put a plaster on it. You need to dig down deeply to help them heal so that they can be healed human beings that go out into society and make a meaningful life.
Well, certainly. I mean, the thing is that the majority of perpetrators are men, clearly. And, it's very often the case that men who were young boys who were subjected to, violence themselves, witnessed perhaps, their fathers kind of abusing and violating their mothers or other women. Unfortunately, those boys grow up and often become perpetrators themselves. And it's a kind of social problem that has been acknowledged here at the summit, and it's something that's been acknowledged quite widely. But, men have accepted that they are a part of the solution, and that there are many, of course, groups that have emerged, men-specific groups, and working with younger men and boys to ensure that the kind of society that we want to create, where there's respect for girls and women, and there's respect between men and women, that's the kind of society we want to create. And that is the kind of conversation that's happening here as well. Remember, we've gone through 28 years, since apartheid ended formally, and there have been a lot of social problems. Poverty and inequality is one of them. People growing up in, socioeconomic circumstances where there's a lot of poverty and deprivation. Women very often stay in abusive relationships because they have no other finances. So social inequality, deprivation, poverty is a key factor that also enables GBV and, the sort of violence we see coming from kind of GBVF. So it has to be a holistic solution that has to be put in place. And that's the kind of thing we're also talking about. But because this is a presidential summit, largely, there's accountability that is being demanded from government because they committed to delivering on these various things. We must remember that in the meanwhile, while government makes its promises, the GBV continues on the ground. So there are a lot of social structures, NGOs and civil society structures that are responding to the needs of the victims and survivors, while all of the stuff is happening at government level. So civil society and government have to come together. And just to respond to the broader question you asked about men, there have to be more kind of structures in place that are basically, involving men to be part of the solution. And those are the kinds of questions that are being raised here.
I think I picked up on government suggesting that they are going to be looking at programs being introduced at school level, targeted clearly at the boy children, because if they are being exposed to violence, at a very young age, as you rightly say, they are then themselves going to become perpetrators. They are going to think that that's the norm. It is normal to behave in a violent manner in a relationship. Do you think that could be one of the solutions, part of the solution? That is not the only answer, but do you think that could be workable at all, Dr. Lubna?
Well, that's one of the things that, I personally have been pushing for in terms of my own work that I do with the Advice Desk for the Abused. This kind of program should have been put in place in the early 90s. Once we transitioned from apartheid into democracy, we should have actually ensured that the kind of education that our young people are getting builds into it, the kind of understanding of gendered relationships. I mean, we teach young people at school how to, for example, manage their money, how to do various other things. But engaging with each other, as males and females, is a critical life skill that needs to be taught at school. They have life orientation, they have other kinds of, curriculum. But the issue really is to teach young people, and particularly from, perhaps early childhood development stage, have simple kinds of lessons and curriculum, so that at that formative age, young children understand this interaction between males and females. So school education is absolutely essential and compulsory. Even if we implement it now, I mean, it is 28 years since we've transitioned to democracy, but it's never too late, and it's an essential thing that we have to make sure. And not only for boys, it has to be for both boys and girls. But boys, of course, you've got to target them because they grow up in a society where there's a lot of patriarchy in all of our societies and communities. And this message that we have to, eliminate patriarchy is very important. And so the school education process is very, very necessary. And even if government is not implementing it at the rate that it should be, we as civil society activists and people working in NGOs, we have to find ways to make sure that it happens in our communities and in our schools.
Dr. Lubna, two more very important questions before I let you go. And I do thank you indeed for breaking away from the seminar to talk with us. Do you know if there any place anywhere in the world that similar programs are running, starting to educate young people at ECD level regarding their roles and the issue around violence and respect? Do you know of any such programs running anywhere in the world where we could possibly duplicate that? Instead of reinventing the wheel, we could copy a similar model and introduce it here in South Africa?
Well, look, there are programs that happen, in Europe, in the US, and in other parts of the world where they do kind of teach what one would refer to as, gender studies. Some call it sex education or whatever. We have to be very clear that we're not wanting to teach about the birds and the bees. We if I can use that colloquial term, we want to ensure that the kind of education we get across to the young people is context specific. So we might actually have to create new material because we live in a society that is different to, say, America or to Europe, even though there are some similarities like, poverty, inequality. But we as a country have our own specific, unique context. And so some of the material that we create has to be relevant to the people. It has to, that live in this country. It has to be in a language they understand, with examples that they understand, with, representing people that look like, us. We don't want to have textbooks that have only fair-skinned people or have people that look really different to who, we are in this context. So the kind of curriculum we create must be specific to our context. But yes, there are programs happening across the world which we can learn from and not necessarily duplicate exactly, but learn from them and apply some of the things that would be relevant to our context. But it must be for the South African space specifically.
Absolutely, we can adapt it for the South African space, as you rightly say. Finally, I'm thinking about adult male perpetrators. So people are also pushing for strongest jail sentences. The feeling is that they need to pay for their for their crimes, for their atrocities. I'm kind of wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea, and it might have come up already at the in the seminar, is I kind of wonder if my perpetrator is going to be given a 6-month jail sentence or a year's jail sentence or a fine. He hasn't been educated otherwise. He's just going to go back out onto the street and perpetrate yet again because he hasn't, relearned or understood what his crime was, why it is wrong, how he needs to interact with people, very especially defenseless women and girls. He needs to be given those skills. And spending 3 months, 6 months, or a year in jail, or paying a 20,000 Rand fine isn't going to fix the problem at all. If anything, you're going to get a very angry man coming out of jail and possibly want to settle scores. So, is there something in place? Are you guys talking around skills development, mentoring, counseling, therapy? Because that needs to be available, that needs to be in place and available for these perpetrators to change their habits, to change the way they interact with people.
Has spoken about amendments that have been made to the various legislation that deal with GBV, the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Act, and so on. So there are laws that have been, existing laws that have been tightened up to ensure that victims get full justice. But in terms of the kind of rehabilitation of someone who is, already, of course, convicted and then is sentenced, we also have to ensure that our magistrates are familiar with the law, because they are the ones who are ultimately, and our judges, who are going to, sentence these people. So if a magistrate, for example, gives a rapist, the minimum sort of term that is available in terms of the law, that is a problem, right? So it has to be a holistic solution. So yes, the laws allow for, maximum sort of time limits in terms of how long a person is supposed to spend in jail for the crime that they've committed. But we've got to ensure that whatever the law provides is strengthened. Also, while the perpetrator is in jail, there are some programs that the, Department of Justice and the Correctional Services are trying to implement to make sure that the person is, I don't know if the term rehabilitated is correct, but at least is, educated to a certain degree, so that when they re-enter society, it's possible that they may come back into society and commit the same crime again. So one of the things we actually have to focus on is prevention rather than post-incident trying to clean up the mess, so to speak. So the investment we need to make ultimately is to ensure that the crime doesn't happen in the first place. And that is one of the things that we have to push, particularly at the summit and more holistically, because we do spend a lot of money, trying to create solutions to the problems after they've happened. But it would be ideal if we have a society where actually we don't have GBV, or that we have, less incidences and prevalence, so that it can be managed. So in terms of, answering your question about how to rehabilitate or to, ensure that a perpetrator who goes back into society understands what he's done, there are programs and interventions in place. But my thinking around it is that we have to try and push to reduce the incidences. Why do men, I get asked this question all the time, why do men actually commit GBV? Why do they abuse? Why do they violate? Now, the answers to those questions are complex. But at the end of the day, if we can have an environment or society where men don't do those things, I think that we are going to be, having a better sort of broader solution to the problem, as opposed to trying to fix it every time rape happens or some other form of sexual offense is committed. So prevention, I think, is really the more important approach, and programs around that, rather than trying to fix it after the crime has been committed.
Dr. Lubna Nadvi, academic and community activist based in KZN, talking to us from the Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence. Thank you indeed for your time, and wonderful talking to you. Till the next time, Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Right, it is exactly 9:59 a.m. and we will be taking a very short break before we are joined by Rizwana Sumat. She's an economist, and we're going to be looking at, oh my word, another gloomy story, and that is government debt projected to be more than, wait for this guys, 4.7 trillion rands. Okay, we'll get into that in a minute or two, inshallah.